Why on earth would a Jewish guy like David Horowitz write a book defending Christianity?
No, because I realized I'm an agnostic. I was a leader of the New Left radicals. When I saw how destructive they were, I had to reevaluate America. And I saw that America could only have been created by Christians and by Protestant Christians. We don't teach that in the schools anymore. But every value that we hold, whether it's equality, inclusion, even diversity, these are all Christian values. And the left hates them, hates Christians because they hate America. I know that Christians are focused on the next world, on saving your immortal souls. But if you don't defend your rights now, you don't defend Christianity now, you're not going to have any. There won't be churches.
David,
they will destroy them.
David, explain to me why people on the left will support same-sex marriage, they'll support transgenderism, and yet they also seem to have no problem with Islam or Sharia law, which is far harsher on these issues than Christians.
Because Islam hates America and hates the West.
Yeah, but why would liberals
the enemy of my
team
enemy.
up with these
I
people?
wrote a book actually called Unholy Alliance about this. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's all I care about. Why would they support Maduro in Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean,
it's
it
a
makes
monster.
no sense.
Well, it does if you see the world as a system of oppression where America, don't forget what the left believes. They believe what the Ayatollah Khomeini said. America is the great Satan and Israel is the little Satan. That explains it all.
Why would people say, let's tear it down? Why wouldn't they say, let's just get us a one-way ticket to one of those better places like Venezuela where we can go?
I actually had a plan to create a Fulbright scholarship for leftists that would send them to the country of their choice, but one way.
See, I think that makes more sense. But I'm serious. Why would they think it's better to tear down this country?
They're delusional. If you remember, I mean, we had, when our foreparents were in the Garden of Eden, it was better than socialism. The fruit fell from the trees, you didn't die, you didn't have pain. But there was one thing that you shouldn't do. The Lord had forbidden you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that, it's like a diet where they say the only thing you can't eat is carrots, and that's all you want.
Trust me, I've never wanted carrots. I can tell you that.
People are ornery. That's the lesson. And what did the serpent say to Adam and Eve? If you eat of that tree, you shall be as God. Every leftist has that arrogance. They think they can remake the world. Just look at the Green New Deal that this idiot woman is proposing. But
you mean we're really going to last longer than 12 years? We're not all going to turn into toast?
You don't get rid of gasoline cars. In 10 years, the planet is going to disappear. Now, how many gasoline cars are there, you think? 300 million? 150 million owners? These owners have already decided they didn't want a Prius, they wanted a gasoline car. They're going to lose a lot of money. You couldn't get rid of gasoline cars without instituting a police state. And believe me, they will have no compunction about doing it. Don't call it socialism, it's communism. That's who they are.
David, in the book, which, by the way, right here at the top, it has this great quote by a guy named Mike Huckabee. It says, most compelling defense of Christianity. It's right there on the cover. So clearly, I have endorsed the book because I think it's fantastic. But one of the things you talk about in that book is Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood.
Right. She was racist.
Well, she was, but
why is it communist?
Why does the left embrace her?
Margaret Sanger thought people should be bred like animals. And there were all these inferior species. And she blamed women for having unprotected sex. That's how she got the contraception. And bringing into the world defective people who, in her mind, were mainly black.
She was a blatant racist,
She was a
wasn't she?
blatant racist. But they have this delusion that they can change the world, first through contraception and then abortion. And even though I know how evil the left is, and they talk a good line, they're very seductive, but so is the serpent. I never thought I'd live to see the day when they would pass laws, the Democrats, to kill children who've already been born. This is so inhuman. And I want more. I see with the younger generation of conservatives, they tell it like it is. They call these enemies of America out. But I'd like to see other people. You know, I don't want you to put yourself in a situation which is uncomfortable for you. But we have to stand up to them and fight back. And
one of the things that you talk very eloquently about in the book Dark Agenda is the need to fight back on issues where we've lost our religious liberty. You go back and chronicle the Supreme Court decisions in the early 60s. Yeah. Now, at that time, you were still a leftist.
You know, it's very odd.
Yeah?
Because, yeah, I was a Jew. They said the Lord's Prayer, which is a Christian prayer, in my assembly. I was fascinated. I loved the words, lead us not into temptation, but thine is the power and the glory and the kingdom. I just loved that. I was appalled when they took prayer out of the schools. Why? I didn't understand it. But it was very sinister. They wiped religion out of the schools so that public school children cannot be told that the Pilgrims were Christians. 98% of the people who settled this country and created it were Protestant Christians. 98%. But the school children, you know, they can teach that there was a first Thanksgiving, but you can't say that the Thanksgiving was to God. You can say that the Hopi Indians pray to Mother Earth, but you can't say that Christians pray to God. This is a very sinister movement. It's been going on for 50 years or more in this country, and it has to be stopped.
David, it's always a great pleasure to visit with you. You're one of the most articulate, if not the most articulate and scholarly person I know in this country who has lived the spectrum of life in that way. Be sure to read the book, Dark Agenda. It is a sobering warning about the rising efforts to destroy America's spiritual foundation. You can get the book at Amazon or your favorite bookstore. Also, you can find out all of David Horowitz's works at horowitzfreedomcenter.org.
All right, you say there is a war on Christianity, and it's real, and it's right on our doorstep. Tell us what is going on in this country that concerns you the most.
Well, a driving of religion out of the public square, you know, the vindictive pursuit of the Colorado baker is one example. You know, Obama administration did the same thing to the Little Sisters of the Poor. The fact that you can't teach public school children the religious foundations of this country. The subtitle of my book is The War to Destroy Christian America. And that's because every value and freedom that we hold dear as Americans, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, but also pluralism, equality, diversity, inclusion, all these are Christian values. They're part of the American heritage because Protestant Christians founded this country. 98% of the settlers in this country who created the United States of America in 1787 were Protestant Christians. There is no America without Protestant Christianity.
And
and our young people are deprived of that knowledge, so they don't know the foundations of their freedoms, and they're easily taken away. We have the Democratic Party, for example, is at war with the Electoral College, with the Senate, wants to eliminate the Senate. It wants non-citizens to vote. The Democratic Party no longer understands, you know, the foundations of the country.
David, some people might be surprised to hear you say that because, you know, if they don't know your previous books and your history, you know, you're Jewish. And so talk to us about how even Jewish Americans are affected by this erosion of American Christianity.
Well, it's almost becoming open season on the Jews. The number one, the group that has suffered the most hate crimes, religious group, are the Jews. It's about 5 to 8 times for example, what Muslims suffer. But Muslims are a protected species in our country, and it's more or less open season on the Jews. You have a Democratic Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar, who's a supporter of terrorists, who, you know, can freely unload anti-Semitic tropes, and the Democratic Party won't discipline her.
In fact, she takes, you know, her and Rashida Tlaib both kind of took credit for that vote, you know, saying that it was really had more to do almost with
those are two Muslim Brotherhood. Those are two representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the fountainhead of Islamic terror against the West. Al-Qaeda, they all come out of the Muslim Brotherhood. And, you know, we have a congressional caucus for the Muslim Brotherhood now.
Let's take a listen to specifically what Rashida Tlaib said. She's convinced there's still work to do when it comes to the bigotry in her own party. She's talking about the Democratic Party, but this is her talking about Islamophobia. Here's Tlaib.
I think Islamophobia is very much among the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party. And I know that's hard for people to hear, but there's only been 4 members of Congress that are of Muslim faith.
Is that, you know,
Islamophobia?
I mean, should we be keeping track of how many Muslims are in Congress?
Islamophobia is a term that was coined by the Muslim Brotherhood to silence critics of Islam. If you notice that there have been 34,000 deadly attacks, with many more people killed, since 9/11, conducted by Muslims. If you say something like that, you're called an Islamophobe. If you point out that the genital mutilation of adolescent girls is taking place across our country, or that women are second-class citizens in Islam, or that gays are targets of genocidal intentions, they kill gays, all of that is dismissed as Islamophobia. I'm not phobic about Muslims. I've said on many occasions there are, 1.5 billion Muslims, and most of them are peaceable, even if they have somewhat backward views from an American point of view of the role of women and so forth. The terrorists, they're a minority, but they're a very big minority. There's like, all the surveys show that between 20 and 40% of Muslims supported Osama bin Laden and support the terrorists. Well, 40% of Muslims is, over 500 million people.
A lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Of course, your book focuses.
But you can't say that. What Tlaib doesn't want any criticism.
Right. There's no room for criticism there.
David, of her Muslim bigotry.
You talk about the fact that
She's a bigot.
American Christianity is under attack here, but also around the world, we've seen unprecedented levels of Christian persecutions. Just this week, U.S. Ambassador for Religious Freedom Sam Brownback returned from a trip to China, and he talked about the religious persecution there, mainly of Muslims, but also Christians. Here are his comments.
Yeah,
the Chinese people are great people. Someday soon, they will be free to practice their faith. The gates of religious freedom will fly open in China, and the Iron Curtain of religious persecution will come down.
That's a stark reminder that in communist countries like China, there is no real freedom.
I don't believe a word
religion.
of that. I like Sam Brownback, but I don't believe a word of that. Yeah, there are 1 billion Muslims in camps in China. The Chinese aren't going to institute religious freedom soon.
No.
They're communists, and their founder of their communism, Karl Marx, was,
right.
an anti-religious bigot.
This is the government of President Xi, David, says. The government of President Xi says the West uses Christianity to subvert China. Some people say that type of thought couldn't happen here in this country, but your book kind of lays out the case that it may someday happen here.
Well, all aggressors, play the victim card. You see it in Rashida Tlaib, and Cortez, and and in China and the Chinese. They pretend they're persecuted, and you see it in the Islamic terrorists. They think they're defending the faith against which is being attacked. It's not being attacked. It's an imperialistic faith. For 1,000 years, Islam has been spread by the sword, and it continues into our day.
All right, once again, David Horowitz's new book is titled Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. It can be found at a fine bookstore near you and online right now.
To the Eric Metaxas Show. They say it takes a big man to admit he's wrong, but I say it takes an even bigger man to admit he's never wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you that bigger man, Eric Metaxas.
Thank you, Todd. And it takes a big man to say what you just said. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, if you listen to the program, I have fun here because I get to talk about things that I care about, and you get to listen in. I'm sitting here with a book. It is called Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America, written by David Horowitz, which sounds vaguely Jewish, wouldn't you say? Well, let's ask the man himself. David Horowitz, it is my honor to have you in the studio.
Well, thank you, Eric.
You're a hero.
It's an honor to be here.
You're a hero of mine. You don't know that, but you know your work has been so important. I've had you on the program before, but never in the studio, the fabulous TBN studios here. I'm excited about your book, but it is kind of funny. We're living in a time, maybe it's always been the case, that the greatest advocates for Christianity are conservative Jews. I've noticed this over and over. Dennis Prager has been a hero. A number of people that I can point to who have had the guts to talk about this. I guess Michael Horowitz. You know Michael Horowitz? There are a number of people out there that they identify as Jewish, and yet they have the guts, or maybe we could say the chutzpah, to say that Christians need to fight because there's a war against Christianity. So before we get into that, I just want to ask your biography. I know your story, but it's fascinating. You grew up with parents who were not just leftists, but were communists. Yeah, Tell us about this.
They were card-carrying communists.
Did you see the card?
No, but
no. Okay.
They always talked about the party.
The party.
And they described themselves as progressives. Very important.
Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. They never used the word communist, but they belonged to the Communist Party. My father lost his job because of it.
And what part of the country was that?
In New York. He was a teacher. And the Communist Party made him say that it was anti-Semitism, whereas what it was there was a law which had actually was called the Feinberg Law. So a Jewish legislator had put it in that you can't be a member of the Communist Party and teach.
But isn't it funny how we've gone backwards? Like back then, it's one thing to have communists around, but at least we had the guts to say this is so fundamentally anti-American, so destructive to everything we hold dear as a republic that we can't coexist with people who are communists. So if you want to be a communist privately, but if you want to teach our kids, you can't be a communist. Today, obviously, that's not the case.
Yeah, I think my father actually, the irony is that he was a good teacher and that he didn't ever brought politics into the classroom. Whereas today we have our K-12 teachers indoctrinating students in communist principles, basically.
Well, so what happened to you? If you're raised by communist parents, how do you become a flame-throwing right-wing conservative?
Well,
flame-throwing in the positive sense.
I was born in '39, and in the '60s I edited the largest magazine of the left,
which was
Ramparts, and I was recruited by a Hollywood producer he invited me to meet the head of the Black Panther Party, Huey Newton.
What year was this?
This was about '73.
You were recruited to meet
I met him and I raised a lot of money.
Did you meet Lenny Bernstein?
No.
Oh, you didn't go to that
because he
party?
was in New York. I met the guy who organized the party. And I raised a lot of money, well over $100,000 to buy a Baptist church, which had been overtaken by Oakland's inner city. And I gave it, I bought it for the Panthers.
The Panthers wanted a church? Any particular reason?
They called it the Son of Man Temple. And, well, it was a recruitment center. And they had about 100 kids. There was a school connected with it. And I created a tax-exempt foundation to fund the school. And I was naive enough to believe our own propaganda that it would be shut down if they didn't keep the books. The IRS would come in because they were Panthers. And the opposite was the case.
Well, that's back when
government did what it touched.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Black so-called progressives. I recruited my bookkeeper at Ramparts to keep the books of the school. And in December 1974, she disappeared. And when
the bookkeeper?
The bookkeeper. And when the police fished her body out of San Francisco Bay the following February, by that time I knew the Panthers had murdered her. And at this February 1975, in April, the anti-American left had driven America out of Vietnam, and the communists proceeded to slaughter 2.5 million Indo-Chinese, and there were no protests. And so I understood that I was involved in a very evil movement. It took me 7 years of, I would say I was clinically depressed during that time because it had been my faith. You have to understand, and this is something that when an agnostic Jew and ex-radical writes a book like this, Dark Agenda, it's not only my understanding of the war against Christians is that progressivism is an alternate religion.
Right. There's no doubt about that. I think that because of your experience, that two things happen as I listen to you tell your story, because I've never heard those details. To have someone close to you murdered by the people you think are the good guys, suddenly you realize they're evil.
And all my friends are supporting them.
And all my friends are supporting them, and I've been supporting them. And so I think this is why I would argue, number one, we have to fight harder for what we believe in because we are fighting against evil. But secondly, we have to have grace for the people who are still confused. In other words, that there are people to let go. It's one thing if you have a friend murdered. It's very clear. But as you know, there are tons of people on the other side of this who hate us or hate what we believe in, who are as deluded as you once were, and they haven't had a clarifying moment. And I think that we have to help them have these clarifying moments. It's becoming tougher and tougher, but we have to try to help them to see what you saw.
But the big hate machine in America is progressives, the Democratic Party. I don't see conservatives. I mean, of course, there'll be some, but the conservative movement doesn't hate.
No. I don't think, I didn't mean that. All I meant was to say that I look at people, because I was the same. I put up a poster of Lenin in my Yale dorm room.
Yeah.
And my father, who taught me to hate communism, and my mother, who grew up in East Germany, they came to visit. And my father said, "Eric, I'd like to have a word with you." And he takes me in the other rooms, Greek immigrant, working menial jobs to put me through Yale. And he says, "Eric, I'd like to ask you a favor. I'd like you to take down that poster." And immediately the scales fell from my eyes. I thought, oh my God, what have I become? I went along with the zeitgeist, and so I think
it was a monster.
Because I remember what it was to be bamboozled and to be fooled. I say, I know there are a lot of people listening right now. They don't know what they think exactly. And I want to say to those people, I was one of those people. You were one of those people. It is possible to see the truth. If you want to see the truth, it is possible to see the truth.
Free will. That's one reason why Christianity is anathema to the left, because if Christians believe in free will, that means you're responsible for what you do. And the left, there's no responsibility. If you're black, if you're female, if you're gay, you're a victim, and therefore you're innocent of anything.
But the good news for you is, as a victim, you can blame the people who made you a victim, and you can fuel your hatred and have moral.
Never take responsibility for what you do.
Well, I even remember.
I mean, one of the central things, of course, that I deal with in Dark Agenda is Roe v. Wade.
We're gonna be right back, folks. The book is Dark Agenda: The War to Destroy Christian America by David Horowitz, with a blurb from our friend Governor Mike Huckabee, who says, most compelling defense of Christianity. Holy cow, what have we come to when we have people who aren't even Christians stepping up to defend what we're not defending? Hey there, folks. Who put on that rock and roll music? What's the matter with you people? I'm talking to David Horowitz. The book is Dark Agenda: The War to Destroy Christian America. I have a copy of it right here. I'm very excited, David Horowitz, to have you on the program. We've already started talking about the themes in the book, but you've written a lot of books. You're known in many circles. What is it that led you to write a book specifically about the war to destroy Christian America? And again, you are not a Christian. What led you to write this book?
But I've always, since leaving the left, I've had a lot of sympathy for the Christian community. It's under siege. When I left the left, I had to re-examine. I understood that I was involved in an evil movement. And that's why I know who Barack Obama is, for example, because he was raised in the same communist background that I was. But he never left the left. He never left the communists. And it's true of Valerie Jarrett and David Axelrod, his two closest advisors. If you know you're involved with evil, the first thing you want to do is warn others, particularly when it has such a seductive face as the left has. You want to warn others.
And of course, many people on the left have no idea that the roots are evil, or that it's become evil. I mean, and I know that not everybody who's a Democrat in the last 50 years, has made common cause with the Black Panthers and with Saul Alinsky and with there are many people voting Democrat who don't have any idea that it has become this, or that it was this in its roots.
That's correct, and you always have to be careful. But anyway, the first thing I wanted to do was to re-examine America, what we thought of the system that we wanted to destroy, and see if there was a case for it. And the first thing that struck me was these inalienable rights we have to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, something that every radical wants. You can't have them unless there's a God, because if they're given by government, they can be taken away. And that was an easy idea to understand, but difficult for an agnostic to embrace. And I had to recognize that if you didn't have respect for believers and for their religious beliefs, you didn't respect them, then you couldn't defend your freedoms. So there's no way to.
Well, there's no doubt. I didn't see it really clearly until fairly recently. I wrote a book called "If You Can Keep It" on this very subject. I had not, before I wrote that book, really understood the inextricable link between faith and freedom, between self-government and virtue. All the founders got it.
The First Amendment, religious liberty, freedom of conscience. If you can't hold the ideas that you have, and if you can't defend them, you can't defend any of your freedoms. The most basic freedom, and it's under constant assault from the left. But that was just the beginning. 98% of the people that settled America and created the United States of America were Protestant Christians, 98%. And then I realized that everything we hold dear, principle of equality, principle of pluralism, inclusion, diversity, they're all a product of the Protestant Reformation. And there are two key doctrines in the Protestant Reformation. One is salvation by faith, which means we are so flawed, we are such sinners, that none of us deserves to get into heaven. And therefore, we can only be saved by God's grace. And the second idea, which is the really revolutionary idea, or the other is critical, is the priesthood of all believers. Before the Reformation, you could not get to heaven without going through the Catholic Church and its priesthood. They sold indulgences if you were stuck in purgatory to get you to heaven. What the Protestant Reformation said is that every human being created by God faces God one-on-one, without an intermediary, without a church, and without a government. And that is a very profound idea, and it's why we have this. We've always had this national ideal that we judge people on the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
It's a staggering
which
thing.
Has been betrayed totally by the Democratic Party these days.
It's a staggering thing, not just to be a Christian and hear a Jew say what you just said, but to have written books on the subjects you just spoke about, and to realize I have never said it as eloquently and as pithily as you just said it. That really is a staggering summation of, millennia of history. How do we get to American self-government? How do we get to have this glorious republic and to understand freedom? All of that, in fact, comes out of, Luther. Really, I say that he freed freedom. That, in other words, it's not that it didn't exist in the Catholic Church, but it was sort of like kept in a vault someplace, and they sort of forgot about it.
Yeah,
and it was there, and he let it out. And once you let that idea out, the priesthood of all believers, all of these ideas eventually work their way into what we're talking about.
Well, what the Protestant reformers understood was the Catholic Church, the church, is a human institution. The Catholic Church claimed, of course, to be the true church and anointed by God and so forth. But that's why we have a system of checks and balances in America, because the founders were believers and they understood that the problem is not society, as the left says, it's us. We are the problem. And therefore, when human beings get into government, you have the same people who create the problems, but now they have a lot more power. So everything that's fundamentally American, the skepticism about the government, the checks and balance system, comes from Protestant beliefs.
It's kind of amazing when you really understand the whole thing, isn't it? Because it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And you want everyone else to get it because it's so vital to keeping the republic. I just have to ask you, did you at any point in this journey think about personally accepting God or personally accepting the God of the Bible?
Yeah, I get all the time people are
well, it seems
trying to
logical
persuade me, but
that you would.
Here's the thing. It was Pascal who said that faith is God touched by the heart. It's not something you can think through. You have to feel it. And maybe I've been so embroiled in politics all my life. I wrote a book called A Point in Time, in which I mentioned this. I quote a letter that Mozart wrote when he was a few months away from actually dying, and it's filled with faith. He understands that death is what life leads to, and that's the transition, into the next life. And I wrote, I wish I had such a faith. It would be much easier living if I did.
But don't you think that by saying you wish you had such a faith, you are already having the beginnings of such a faith? Because why would you wish it?
Well, because it would be such a comfort in life.
But faith is not a feeling. In other words, when people say that it's a feeling,
I've lived my life in a religious way. That is, I have tried to take responsibility for everything.
You've just summed up faith by works, which you understand is at the heart of the problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So it counts for nothing. In other words, you try to do everything right.
Well,
now, you and I know it doesn't count for nothing, really.
I've always felt,
but
if there is a God, he's not going to punish me for not being a believer if I lived a decent life.
Well, Jesus was a Jew, and they can be very mean people. I would be worried if I were you. No, it's an interesting thing because I love having these conversations because people tend to be very hidebound. In other words, if you're talking to somebody who's reformed, they will always say, well, there is no free will. Luther argues against free will. And you start realizing it's a little bit more complicated. On the one hand, there is free will. On the other hand, there is no free will. And you're talking about something that is sort of beyond our dimensions of understanding, right? We know on some level anything good we do, if the fall is true, anything we do has to be inspired by God. But if it's inspired, if it originates with him, any goodness, it didn't originate with us. So, it's a little chicken or the egg kind of thing. It's a little complicated. But
well, you have a choice to do good or to do evil.
Right. But what I'm trying to say is that there are people who would argue that, no, you don't. They would say, in fact, if you do good, it's because God inspired you to do good. And I think that becomes sophistry. I'm with you, basically. That
wind up being a puppet.
It becomes,
the whole point is, I've also in the book I mentioned, Dostoevsky, of course, has this.
Well, hang on. If you bring up Dostoevsky, I know that's going to take more than 15 seconds. So hold on, folks. We're talking to David Horowitz. The book is Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. Hello there, folks. That's Boz Skaggs. I'm Eric Metaxas, and I'm sitting here with David Horowitz, the author of a spectacular book, Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. David, you were just going to say something about Dostoevsky, and then I want to leap into the book.
Basically what he said is that if God wanted to compel you to believe, Jesus could have risen off the cross. But he didn't, because that's the basic thing, that you have free will. You can choose to eat that apple, or you can choose not to.
But at some point, you believe 1 + 1 = 2, but it's not a heart thing. It's a truth thing. And you know you have enough facts, and I know you know, otherwise I wouldn't say this to you, to know what is true and what is not. And so you're looking for some kind of a spiritual experience or some kind of a feeling. And I think to myself that, that's like somebody saying like, well, I don't love my wife today. And it's like, well, look, love is an action. It's not a feeling. Some days you'll feel this way. Some days you get an argument, whatever. But like you're talking about truth right now. And I know I'm not going to put you on the radio program.
The belief in God is a faith, and belief that there is no God is a faith. Atheism is a faith.
Right. But you realize
I'm just an agnostic.
But the facts
I would be as surprised to find myself on the other side in the next life as I would.
But the facts, we don't have time because I want to talk about your book, but the facts against agnosticism and atheism have become so insanely overwhelming that it is a crazy choice not to believe. That's my belief. In fact, I'll give you a book before you leave, because it's gotten to that point. The science, they're not going to talk about it on TV, but it's become overwhelming that if you had to choose at gunpoint, it's no contest. But we're going to talk about your book, Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. The war.
High gear in 1962 with the first Supreme Court decision.
Okay, that's The War to Destroy Christian America.
That's right.
Okay.
To take prayer out of the schools. For 170 years, there have been prayer in the schools. Talk about precedent, talk about stare decisis. But these happen to be 6 lawyers appointed for life by politicians. That's what the Supreme Court is. They decided it was unconstitutional.
So
a completely fraudulent decision.
Of that group, who were the ringleaders in 62?
The ringleaders.
Is it like Warren Burger? I don't know. Who are we talking about?
No, it wasn't Burger. I don't remember.
Well, it doesn't matter. But the point is that you're right. You want to talk about stare decisis.
I remember the dissenter was Potter Stewart, and he pointed out the hypocrisy of the court, because the Supreme Court opens with this statement, God save this country, our country, and this honorable court. And then there was another Supreme Court decision in the following year, 63. The plaintiff was Madeleine Murray O'Hare, a lunatic communist. She was the main plaintiff. She had tried to defect with her family to the Soviet Union the year before she launched this campaign against prayer in the schools.
Why didn't we let her defect? What were we thinking?
No, the Russians didn't want her in.
Oh,
they saw she was a lunatic.
They're not so stupid.
But the Supreme Court didn't. And the upshot of this is that you can't teach, if your kid is going to a public school, they cannot be taught that the Pilgrims were Christians. They can be taught the first Thanksgiving, but they can't say in school who the thanks was given to, which is God. You can have the Hopi Indians praying to Mother Earth, but you can't have Christians praying to Jesus.
I mean, it's a madness. There's no question.
Well, it's worse than that because it's robbed all of our young people. And if you didn't notice, just look at Cortez and her communist cronies. Robbed young people of the knowledge of what their freedoms are based on. How did we get to these freedoms? If you can't talk about the religious origins of this country, you can't talk about it. Because, of course, all these Protestants were fleeing religious persecution in countries where the state had established a religion.
Well, not only were they fleeing religious persecution, but they wanted, obviously, John Winthrop is quoting Jesus when he says, we want to be a city on a hill. In other words, they wanted to be a model of Christian civilization and democracy for the world.
Our youth in public schools have been completely robbed of this knowledge. This is an atrocity committed against our country. And
with our tax dollars.
And against these children. And then, of course, the Supreme Court went on to an even more fraudulent and horrendous decision, which is Roe v. Wade. Again, it was brought by the radicals at the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, but also, believe it or not, the SDS chapter at Austin University of Texas. They were the ones who got these lawyers on the case. And what did they do? The Planned Parenthood lawyers had invented a right to privacy, which they said was in the Constitution. There's no right to privacy in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't talk about men and women or their relations or having birth. So it's completely invented. So overnight, again, it's 9 lawyers appointed for life by politicians made this decision, changed the fundamental law of the country overnight. You can see why a radical minority loves the Supreme Court, because it can just ram down the whole country's throats.
But you have hope with a president who's trying to appoint originalists that we may be able to reverse some of these.
Yeah, but it depends on having a decent president, not a Barack Obama.
Well, it just so happens Barack Obama's been out of office for 2+ years and counting. We're going to be right back, folks. I'm talking to the author of Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. David Horowitz is here. We'll be right back. Hey there, folks. If you want to talk about eclectic music, David Horowitz, my guest, was just commenting on it. And this is, I picked all the music.
But it's happy music.
It's happy, 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 happy. Speaking of happy, we have a president who a lot of hard conservatives never believed during the primaries that this guy would ever appoint pro-Constitution judges. He has done that rather dramatically. So you must have some hope for the future of the Supreme Court at this point.
Yeah, as long as Trump, is healthy and in office.
He's gonna do 2 terms.
The thing about Roe v. Wade is it was an assault on all the Christian communities in America. And it had the effect of creating the religious right. Prior to Roe v. Wade, evangelicals were skeptical of politics. And for all the people out there who are religious, you have to fight for the basic rights. If we lose, if these people succeed, if the Democratic Party succeeds, there won't be any churches.
But see, this is the point, is that you have a lot of evangelicals, speaking as one, have terrible theology. They don't seem to understand that God calls us to fight for what is right and true. Now, we're not supposed to fight the way the world
You've got all
fights.
these missionaries. If who are trying to change the world, make it religious. The Democratic Party is the anti-missionary party, if you like. It is so hostile to religion, it will destroy the churches. It's just undo everything that. So there's not a consistency there.
But don't you? Yeah.
But it created the religious right. It drove the Catholic base of the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. And the religious right came together, and they first elected Ronald Reagan. And then, of course, as we know, they elected Donald Trump and saved this country. That's my book is about the left's war against Christianity is its war also against America. We are in a battle for our lives as a people now. And, you know, I hope my book helps rally our forces.
We've got a book for you, Alvin. We got to get a Donald Drains the Swamp to the great David Horowitz. He has grandchildren. I have to tell you that everything you're saying, of course, I agree with and dramatically agree with, because it's so vital that people understand the stakes. There are many people, many evangelicals, who have very bad unbiblical theology, and they think that, well, fighting is wrong. And you think, no, if you were a slave in a slave ship, wouldn't you hope that William Wilberforce would fight as a Christian for your right not to be enslaved? If you're a Jew in a boxcar going to Treblinka, wouldn't you hope that some Lutherans really believed in Jesus and would fight against the anti-Semitism?
Didn't Jesus himself say, I bring not peace but a sword?
Yes, he did. Funny enough, yes, he did. And I think that you know, it's one of those things where people pick and choose. They cherry pick what they want to hear. And I really think that there are many evangelicals today that they really feel, because they have a bad taste in their mouth from the, you know, the religious right and the culture wars, I think they've decided, you know what, we're just going to punt. We're going to go back, and we're just going to quote unquote preach the gospel. But you cannot preach the gospel of Jesus without speaking
They're not going to let you preach.
Injustice. Well, that's another story.
Well, I can't visit a college anymore. I mean, that's how bad it is.
Lucky you. Seriously.
Well, yeah, if you go.
It is a funny thing that what you're talking about is that we've got to fight, and the people on the left accuse those on the right who do fight as being, you know, whatever name in the book, which I think is pretty clear that they've run out of arguments. So now we're at the name calling level. And you can't take it seriously.
All they do is slander.
I'm excited about your book. You published it.
I want to point out what separates the left and the right. These are really two religious forces. Is this doctrine of the salvation by faith? That is, people on the left think that human beings are good and society makes them bad. They don't get the connection that society is a creation of human beings. And therefore, they think if they can make you be true to your good nature, be politically correct. If either you choose to be politically correct or they will force you to be politically correct, they can create the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's a very old heresy. It's called the Pelagian heresy.
Oh, yes.
Pelagius believed that sin was against human nature. And therefore, if you were just true to your nature, you could create the kingdom of heaven without God, without the intervention of God. Just be a good Christian.
That heresy is almost as big a heresy as not believing Jesus is the Messiah, as predicted in the Old Testament. You know that, David.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I have to say it's probably worse, because like Thomas Jefferson did not believe that in the divinity of Jesus.
Right. He believed in being a good person, and God's basically fair, and, you know, he wouldn't hold you to any crazy standards. He believed that God grades on a curve, and of course we know that's not true.
The godfather of modern conservatism was St. Augustine.
I never heard anybody say that. Is that's pretty cool.
I think I put it in. I don't know if I have it in the book.
We have to now. I know we just have a minute and a half left. Can we do another segment, or do we have to stop? I'm looking at the bosses here. They tell me, are we out of time here? Can I get a word? Yes. We've got to wrap it up. All right. So, David, look. I'm going to put this out on YouTube, and I know you'll get it out there. This is an important book, Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. Again, I find it tremendously ironic and yet apt that a Jew should write this. Many Christians would be afraid to say something this strongly. You've never been afraid, not since you had your conversion out of the party of Huey Newton.
Yeah. I actually, when I was at 17, I worked for the Forest Service in Idaho, and I gave a sermon in a Lutheran church, believe it or not, this Marxist revolutionary.
Yeah, of course.
And my sermon was all based on The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde, which is a beautiful story about Christian charity.
I love Oscar Wilde. He became a Christian right at the end of his life. Yeah. Most people don't know that. It's an extraordinary story. And he wrote another book as a children's story, The Selfish Giant.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I'll never forget when I read that. Yeah, it's about Jesus. But, I mean, it's just to have a wit and a mind like Oscar Wilde, devote himself to that kind of thing. David, do you have a website that folks can go to?
Yeah, they could go to frontpagemagazine.com.
Frontpagemagazine.com. Even I didn't know that. Frontpagemagazine.com. The book, folks, is Dark Agenda. The author, David Horowitz. Please get a copy. David, thank you.